Feel for philosophy. Feel the thought, think the feeling. Welcome to our new discussion on schools of psychology. In this session, we will explore the major schools that have shaped psychological thought and practice, from structuralism to cognitive psychology. Each school offers a distinct perspective on understanding the human mind and behavior, reflecting different assumptions, methods, and philosophical foundations. Through this discussion, we aim to understand how psychology evolved as a scientific discipline, how different schools explain mental processes and behavior, and why these approaches remain relevant in contemporary psychological studies. Please stay with us. Presented by Feel for Philosophy.
So, have you ever just stopped and wondered, what is actually going on inside my own head? It's a question that's fascinated people forever, right? But, the scientific study of the mind, psychology, it didn't start with brain scans. Nope, it began in a lab with people literally trying to analyze their own consciousness, almost like putting their own thoughts under a microscope. And just look at where we are today. To understand why we do what we do, we're not just talking about feelings, we're analyzing the brain's actual chemistry and electrical signals. That jump from just thinking about thinking to measuring brain activity, that is an absolutely incredible journey. So, the big question is, how on earth did we get from there to here? How did that massive shift happen? Well, let me tell you, this history is not just some boring list of names and dates you have to memorize. It's really the story of an intellectual battlefield. It's a place where huge ideas clashed, they challenged each other, and in some cases, completely overthrew one another. And it's through all that conflict that modern psychology was actually forged. Okay, so who fired the first shot in this epic war of ideas? Well, the first official move was made by a guy named Wilhelm Wundt in Germany, way back in 1879. He set up the very first formal psychology lab, and with it, he launched the first major school of thought, which we now call structuralism. Now, what's so wild about structuralism is just how ambitious their goal was. Wundt and his students wanted to create a periodic table of the mind. Seriously, just like a chemist can break water down into hydrogen and oxygen, they believed they could break down our conscious experience into its most basic parts. Things like sensations, images, and feelings. To do this, they used a method called introspection, basically looking inward and reporting what you experience. But this led to a massive and, you could say, fatal flaw. I mean, think about it. How could they ever be sure that one person's internal experience was the same as another's? My experience of the color red could be totally different from yours, and there was just no objective way to check it. The whole method was way too subjective to be truly scientific. And that giant flaw is exactly why a reaction was bound to happen. The limits of structuralism just threw the doors wide open for a new way of thinking. So enter William James and functionalism. They basically said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Trying to break the mind into tiny bits is like trying to understand a flowing river by analyzing a single drop. They completely shifted the question from what is the mind to what is the mind for. So the functionalists, they were really inspired by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. They saw our mental abilities like fear or planning or memory as adaptations that helped our ancestors survive. And here's the key takeaway. They took psychology out of the stuffy lab and into the real world. They started asking how our minds actually help us function in our everyday lives. But while the functionalists were busy looking at the practical uses of the conscious mind, a doctor over in Vienna was about to launch a kind of sneak attack from a completely different direction. His name? Sigmund Freud. And he argued that everything we think we know about ourselves, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Freud's truly revolutionary idea was that the real reasons we do things are hidden deep inside our unconscious mind. He said there are these powerful forces, repressed memories, forbidden desires, conflicts from our childhood we're not even aware of, that are secretly pulling all the strings, shaping who we are and what we do. He came up with this model of our personality as this constant internal battle. So you've got the id, which is like a screaming toddler that wants everything right now. Then there's the superego, the strict, moralizing parent telling you what you should do. And caught right in the middle is the poor ego, this exhausted mediator just trying to find a realistic compromise. Psychological problems, Freud said, come from the conflict between these three. Now, Freud's influence was huge. We even have phrases like the Freudian slip. But here's the problem that his critics jumped on immediately. how do you scientifically prove any of this? You know, if I accidentally call my boss mom, a Freudian analyst might say it reveals some deep-seated issue. But maybe I was just tired, right? His ideas were incredibly hard to prove or disprove, and that was a huge problem for a field trying to call itself a science. And that lack of hard proof, it led to a major backlash. I'm talking about an aggressive counter-revolution called behaviorism, led by people like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. They basically looked at all the talk about the unconscious and said, enough of this. We can't see it, we can't measure it, so let's get real and focus on what we can see. For the behaviorists, the mind was just a black box. Whatever is happening inside, thoughts, feelings, desires, is totally irrelevant because you can't observe it scientifically. They argue that the only thing a true science of psychology should study is observable behavior. You look at the inputs from the environment, and you measure the outputs, the actions. Simple as that. So now you've got these two totally opposite views clashing. On one side, you have psychoanalysis, digging deep into the hidden past and the unconscious mind. And on the other, you have behaviorism, which refuses to even look inside the mind, focusing only on how rewards and punishments from our environment shape what we do. And look, the impact of behaviorism is everywhere, you can't deny it. That little dopamine hit you get when you earn points on a coffee app, that's a reward shaping your behavior. The clicker you use to train your pet, that's associating a sound with a treat. They gave us incredibly powerful tools to change behavior, but the cost was enormous. They completely ignored human thought, creativity, and feeling. Of course, not everyone was willing to accept this, robotic view of what it means to be human. A rebellion started brewing, first in Europe and then in America. Several new movements rose up to bring the mind back into the picture and reclaim the richness of human experience. One of the first was Gestalt psychology, and their mantra was simple but so profound. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They argued that our brain isn't just a passive receiver of information, it's actively organizing things into meaningful patterns. For example, when you listen to a song, you don't hear a bunch of separate notes, you hear a melody. That's your mind at work, creating a complete experience. And then, a powerful third force emerged to challenge both Freud's dark, deterministic view and the sterile, robotic world of the behaviorists. Humanistic psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers came along and declared that people are not slaves to their past or just puppets of their environment. They believed there was something more to us. Instead, they offered this really optimistic view, emphasizing free will, human potential, and our natural drive for what they called self-actualization. That is, the desire to become the absolute best version of ourselves. Honestly, this whole movement is basically the philosophical grandparent of today's entire wellness industry, from mindfulness apps to the popular quest to find your purpose. But how did the mind finally get its scientific credibility back? Well, that came with something called the cognitive revolution. As computers started becoming a thing, psychologists found this powerful new metaphor. They started thinking of the brain as the hardware and the mind as the software. All of a sudden, mental processes like memory, problem-solving, and language could be studied scientifically as forms of information processing. The mind was back, and this time it was here to stay. So, after all these epic battles, where does that leave psychology today? Did one school of thought finally win the war? Well, no, not at all. Instead, that intellectual battlefield has finally reached a kind of peace treaty, a new, more unified way of understanding the human experience. Today, most psychologists use an integrated approach called the biopsychosocial model. So to understand an issue like depression, a modern psychologist won't just look at one thing. They'll consider the biological factors, like genes and brain chemistry. They'll look at the psychological factors, like negative thought patterns. And they'll analyze the social factors, like a person's family, relationships, and culture. It's the whole picture. So here's the most important point of all. This whole journey wasn't really about one idea defeating and replacing another. It was about integrating all these different perspectives, consciousness, behavior, the unconscious, our potential, brain function, into a much richer, more complete picture of what it means to be human. Every single one of these schools, even with their flaws, asked crucial questions that helped the science grow up. And that brings us to one last big question. As today's psychology pulls all these ideas together, What's going to be the next great intellectual battlefield? I mean, with the rise of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, what new fundamental questions will psychology have to answer about the very definition of being human? The battle for the mind? It is far from over.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support encourages me to create more content. Thank you.